Well, thank you very much. My name is Casper Klynge, and I am the Vice President for Microsoft for European Government Affairs. And I have with me a good friend and a good colleague, Camille, of course, the Assistant Secretary General from NATO, responsible for defense investments. And, before kicking off, we talk a lot about how the new digital reality, how new technologies is very much leading to automation. Now, what Camille and I did not know is that apparently Cybersec is taking this very seriously, because they have automated the moderator function in this Fireside chat. So Camille, we are apparently on our own, and we will try and make the best of the next 20 minutes or so. Camille, great to see you, although a little bit further away than normally.
Great to see you, Casper, and great to join all the participants to Cybersec.
Thanks a lot, Camille. And listen, I'll sort of try and get us started by asking the first question, and then we agreed a little bit earlier today that we'll try and sort of keep it as a real conversation. And I know I will also be held accountable to what the private sector is doing in this arena. But as we've heard in the many previous discussions and panels today, in many ways, we're having this discussion around cybersecurity, around the necessity of a transatlantic collaboration, perhaps also the necessity of having the private and the public sector working closer together at a pretty pivotal moment in the world. I think what we're seeing, not only in Ukraine, but in fact across Europe, across the world, is that cyber attacks is becoming the new normal. It is as serious as we've seen with previous conflicts, not using the virtual space, and we've seen a real spike in, attackers using the new means of through cybersecurity. I think what we've also seen, which of course certainly applies for a company like Microsoft, is that we're finding ourselves increasingly in the front line, with our technologies, with our platforms being used both to mitigate the threat from cybersecurity attacks, but of course also the very platforms that some of these attacks are being launched. But Camille, I want to go back to you and to NATO, and perhaps ask you the first sort of open question, which is how NATO is trying to respond to this new reality, a reality where the virtual world is becoming as important as the physical world, at least to some extent, and how you're working with emerging technologies in NATO.
Casper, thank you very much. Great to see you, and great to see that you put a tie on, which is a tribute to bureaucrats like myself that is there. Let me just start more seriously on a serious note. Obviously, the cyber threats are daily threats. It's not. It's blurring the difference between peace, crisis, and war, and this is something that at NATO we have to take extremely seriously, and we're taking extremely seriously. I won't dwell on the current environment. I know the Deputy Secretary General mentioned that in his own remarks, but it is absolutely clear that there is no crisis which doesn't have an extremely profound cyber component and cybersecurity component. So this is something that we are taking as a top priority in the NATO environment. And let me maybe just mention a few things that might be interesting for the participants here. First of all, we did recognize cyber as a domain of operation. So this is a bit of a military jargon, but at the end of the day, this is all about how can we organize ourselves to recognize next to land, air, maritime, and space cyber as a domain of operation, which means that it is a contested environment. It is an environment where we do expect and we are seeing constant challenges. So we really have to up our game in this domain. In order to do so, next to this recognition, we also adopted a new cyber defense policy, and we are really trying to keep up our game. So it means an effort to adapt our own networks. We have undertaken a massive cyber adaptation effort at NATO in order to secure our networks and guarantee that we are more resilient to cyber attacks that we are seeing happening almost on a daily basis, notwithstanding moments of crisis. The second thing is that we also need to invest in the future. And in order to do that, we are really working on a further digital transformation of NATO to modernize or infrastructure, or IT infrastructure, or command and control infrastructure to make it more robust, more resilient, and also more agile for the future. And this is, by definition, at NATO, a transatlantic conversation that bring all 30 allies around the table, those who are most advanced, those who are investing in cybersecurity. And there are a lot of good news where we see a number of allies investing in this domain and supporting an effort at NATO to do that. We also have to transform further, and there again, cybersecurity is a critical element of that transformation. It makes very little sense to digitalize our processes or a military environment if we don't have the most robust cybersecurity. And there we do count very much on the private sector to be a partner in this endeavor, because we cannot do this on our own. We have a fantastic NATO Communication and Information Agency, but it is relying on the expertise of the private sector to deliver the best product at the best moment. Finally, there is a last dimension, which is an effort in the domain of innovation, which is led by my colleague David Van Wiel and the Emerging Security Challenges Division, which is really to see how we can incorporate earlier and better, also in close cooperation with the tech companies and emerging and disruptive technologies leaders, how we address those technological challenges for the future, and how do we make sure that NATO keeps its military and technological edge, which has been a constant feature of that. So this is a very interesting ongoing conversation. I know the Deputy Secretary General mentioned our effort on creating a defense innovation accelerator for the North Atlantic. And this endeavor should enable us to stay on top of that very complex game in an environment that is extremely fluid. And I'm again going back to the fact that the cyber threats that we face are present here and now. On that note, what I would really like to do is maybe to throw the ball back at Casper, to invite him also to see how does maybe not only Microsoft, but the private sector can help on this, and how can we work together in addressing those challenges. We also work with our EU colleagues on a regular basis, but I think the private sector has an essential role to play in that particular conversation, so that we can uphold our norms, regulations, standards, but also our value and ethics as we move into a very, as we address a very complex and somewhat dangerous world in the cyber domain. So maybe Casper, over to you.
Thanks, Camille. And we're doing a relatively good job, I think, in sort of self-moderating ourselves so far. Let's see if it continues until the very end. And thanks for mentioning that I'm wearing a tie today. I appreciate that. On a more serious note, I think, first of all, thanks for outlining sort of how NATO is working on what is, without doubt going to be one of the key challenges and one of the key threats to security, not only here in Europe, but also more globally. I think for a company, whether it's Microsoft or some of our competitors in this arena, whether we like it or not, what we of course find today is that we are among frontline workers when it comes to cybersecurity threats, whether it's from state actors or non-state actors, whether it's due to criminality or more disruptive elements, we are directly involved in it. And I think there are sort of two reasons why we think that we have a societal responsibility as a private company in this arena. The first one is, of course, that, our technology runs on trust. And with the kind of cybersecurity attacks that we're witnessing, of course, the trust in our platforms, the trust in new technology, or perhaps more widely, the trust in digitalization is, of course, affected when you're seeing these kind of disruptive attacks that we're currently witnessing as well. So I think when we speak to family or friends or to our customers and partners, there is an expectation that we do everything possible to defend against the cyber attacks that we are seeing unfolding. And I think that's an important element. And I might come back and say a couple of words about the particular situation we're facing between on-premise systems and going to the cloud, and our ability to be efficient in protecting our customers, whether they're private or public customers. But I think the second area that I would just point to, which I think is relevant to NATO, to Western values, to Europeans and to Americans, or indeed to global citizens more widely, is the impact that cyber attacks have on the digital economy in a broader scale. And Camille, if you allow me to mention a small anecdote from my previous life when I was still working for government. I was a bilateral ambassador in a Southeast Asian country when one of the previous big cyber attacks hit NotPetya some years ago. And working with a big company, a big shipping company, I sort of had the experience firsthand of seeing how incredibly disruptive this cyber attack was. In the case of this shipping company, making it impossible for them to have an overview of what containers were on specific ships and therefore what containers to unload in specific harbors. And I think it's just a small, simple anecdote of what was really an eye-opener for me back then on the new reality around cybersecurity and the importance. But it also shows the vulnerability of the digital economy at a moment we're still in the global pandemic, where going digital is not a nice to have, it is an absolute need. And if you want to cut it in the digital economy, you need to have a digital strategy that is ambitious and leading in that direction. So I think, what we're looking at is not only a security issue, it's not only an issue about defending an organization like NATO or the European Union. It is really also about making sure that we can move into the digital economy, remain competitive at a global stage. And then perhaps to answer your question more specifically, I think, whether we like it or not, whether others like it or not, we run a lot of these systems. We run a lot of the technologies. We run the cloud that many of the systems are operating in. And what we've seen in the last couple of years, as I mentioned at the beginning, is an incredible spike in the number of cyber attacks. Lately, an enormous amount of malware attacks that is either, related to criminality or to simply just disrupt systems and make systems inoperable. And I think that shows the seriousness of the new reality we're finding ourselves in. But also, as you pointed out, Camille, the need for the private sector and the public sector, whether it's individual governments or international organizations like NATO, we simply need to work together to defend the kind of environment and the kind of economic and value-based systems that we're operating in. I then will try and sort of force you a little bit back on the road here, Camille, because when we look at the next couple of months, we have a Madrid summit for NATO coming up in the not too distant future, and of course there are also work around a new strategic concept. And I realize that you guys are incredibly busy with current affairs, but I was wondering if you could share with me and with the audience sort of your expectations to what the strategic concept development will look like, and whether this new environment will be reflected, and perhaps also whether there will be possibilities to create a closer interface with the private sector on that basis.
Thank you, Casper. I think first of all, it's having been dealing with NATO affairs for quite a long time. We've come a long way. I did work to support what was called a group of experts that prepared the previous strategic concept 10 years ago. Cyber was mentioned, but it was only a couple of paragraphs. It came a bit as an additional thought. Now it is very much front and center in everything we do. I mentioned that we recognize cyber as a domain of operation, but we've also recognized that an attack in the cyberspace could trigger NATO's Article 5, so the solidarity amongst all allies, because precisely we do recognize what you mentioned, what you mentioned, Casper, is that cyber can indeed be so disruptive that it would cross the Article 5 threshold by threatening or literally our ways of living and our societies in a very deep fashion. And experience has shown us from the cyber attacks on Estonia a decade ago to the latest events in and around Ukraine that it's not only it's going to be part of any crisis, but that it might even be the weapon of choice in certain environments because it is there. So we have to be ready, we have to be prepared for that, and we have to fully understand those consequences. So as we prepare for the Madrid NATO summit this next summer, indeed, I would argue that cyber issue and that the broader effort to on the digitalization of our operations will be front and center in a lot of our thinking. This is on Secure's mind, this is on the Secretary General's mind, and this is informing a lot of our work. We keep adapting to that. I had the privilege of hiring the first CIO for the NATO enterprise. I think he was joining you today, Manfred Woodrow Demmer, and he's really tasked to make sure that we upscale our game, and that we have the right tools and the right policies. Because one of the challenges that we face as any large organization is that we are not maybe not integrated enough, and that we, as a NATO enterprise with all the multiple bodies that NATO is composed of, we need to be to have policies and technologies that really serve the whole and make the weakest link not much weaker than the rest of the organization. That also involves industry, and that's why we have a data-centric security initiative based on the NATO standards, which is really working with industry to develop and adopt secure solutions, cloud solutions, and that is absolutely critical, because as we start moving some of our operations to the cloud, we need to have a very, very in-depth dialogue with industry that will be providing those cloud solutions in order to make sure that the best security standards are approved. And that is something that is going to be one of the game changers of the coming years as we change our processes. Then I think that dialogue needs to go further. I mean, we do have a couple of venues where we engage the private sector, the tech companies, or NATO Communication Information Agency as a major event where all the key players take part, called NITEC. The NATO Industry Forum that I co-chair with the Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation give more and more space to those debates, and that was fascinating to listen to in Rome last fall. So at the end of the day, I think what we really need to do is to make this, as we review this foundational document, which is a strategic concept, that we really incorporate this. And there, the challenge is, and I'll be very honest, is how do we connect the sort of political, diplomatic debate with and enable it to keep pace with the changes in technology and in the way we do business. So that is a bit of a challenge, because sometimes we do have politicians, diplomats who are not keeping necessarily track of all those changes and do not automatically realize how much this is changing the way we need to prepare for future conflicts wherever they might occur. So this is really a challenge there. I'm quite sure that as we prepare for the next strategic concept, there will be opportunities to engage industry. We already started that in a couple of events that I mentioned, but I think it is very much part of the conversation from my perspective, that we not only need to understand what are the most important drivers for change and the pace of technology, but moreover that we have also the policy conversation that get those key players in the private sector part of the conversation, because we need to work with the private sector, with the European Union, because we won't do everything on our own. We need to work with every single ally on that, so that we have we develop policies that are both well aligned with the allies' priorities, but also provide us the foundation for this effort to digitalize and be able to do our job in a very hard and demanding cybersecurity environment.
Camille, thanks very much. And we are almost at time, and I think we can continue as we've done before this conversation, and we should. And I know we're meeting next week to talk a bit more about it. I think thanks for laying out also your expectation to the strategic concept and what we can expect from that. I think perhaps my last points in this chat would be a little bit focusing on also how new technology can be helpful in mitigating some of these threats. And I think whether we look at NATO or whether we look at the European Union, I think what is important here is that there is no contradiction between a NATO that protects and a NATO that connects, or Europe that protects and a Europe that connects. Because what we're seeing, including in the latest cybersecurity attacks, is of course that the best way for us to mitigate those threats is in fact if systems are operating in the cloud. And then you can say, do you have commercial interest in this space? Absolutely, we do. But we would advocate for a cloud-first transition strategy, regardless of what cloud solutions a customer would choose, because that is simply the reality of today's world, that moving into the cloud provides a much more sophisticated, much more real-time ability of all of us to help defend the critical infrastructure that we're so dependent on in the digital economy. I'll let that be the last words. Camille, always a pleasure to be with you and to listen to you. And once again, thanks a million to the organizer, to the Cybersec Forum, for allowing us to self-moderate this small fireside chat. Thanks a lot.